Welcome to Elite Stories, where history comes to life. Subscribe and journey through time with us. Now, let's dive into today's story. The prisoner, said the woman with a still wider grin, is Caradoc himself. He came to my hut after the battle, and you should have seen how pale and weary he was. He thought I would shelter him because he is my son-in-law, but after he had fallen asleep, I said to myself, the Romans are good folk, and they will be grateful to an old woman who hands over a wicked rebel. That will do, my good woman, said the general, cutting her short. Here is a bag of gold. It is your fee for delivering the British leader into our hands. Come and show us where he is to be found, or if you are playing us false, it will be the worse for you. The old woman's fingers closed round the gold, and her delight at getting so much money prevented her from feeling the contempt in the general's voice and eyes. Presently, the tiny hut was surrounded by Roman soldiers. Bending his tall form at the doorway, the general entered, followed by two soldiers, leading between them the old woman, whose skinny fingers were tightly clutching the bag of gold. Caradoc stirred in his sleep. Then he sat up and looked at the Romans. His eyes fell upon his mother-in-law, and he understood. He had to stand up and submit to having his hands bound behind his back by the Roman soldiers. The old woman left the hut and disappeared with her ill-gotten gains. For once in her life, she felt ashamed of herself. She had betrayed her country, and although she was now one of the richest women in Britain, she was never really happy again. When the wounded chieftain joined the other prisoners in the Roman camp, his wife and daughter fell into his arms, weeping. Caradoc tried his best to comfort them, and he begged all the prisoners to have courage and to bear their misfortunes like brave men and women. After this victory, the Roman general returned to his own country. Caradoc and the other prisoners were carried on board the vessels of the conquerors, and after a voyage of many days, they landed upon the strange, unknown shores of Italy. The Roman people were delighted to hear that the wild, savage island of Britain had at last been subdued, and when the victorious general reached the city, they resolved to give him a public triumph. The emperor and empress sat on thrones in front of their palace while the general was drawn through the streets in a chariot decked with flowers and garlands. All the citizens came out to see him, and the balconies and even the roofs of the houses were crowded with people who shouted and hurrahed and threw up their caps as the conqueror passed by. Behind the chariot came the troops who had taken part in the victory. The soldiers marched past in fighting array, their helmets and spears garlanded with flowers and with wreaths of laurel, and they looked round them proudly in response to the shouts of their countrymen. But these were not the only people who took part in the procession. Immediately behind the general followed the captives whom he had taken in the war. Caradoc with his wife and daughter, and the other prisoners who had helped him in his 9-year struggle with the Romans. As these poor captives passed, loaded with chains, the people in the streets jeered at them and shouted out unkind speeches. Most of the prisoners walked with downcast eyes and sad faces, but Caradoc marched along with so proud a bearing that the spectators wondered at the courage shown by this savage chief. He did not seem to feel the dust and glare, or to be abashed by the hard, unfeeling gaze of the thousands of people who had come out to stare at him. As he passed, he looked at the fine buildings, at the triumphal arches and the marble palaces, and at the gaily dressed people who thronged the streets. Sometimes he looked up into the sunny Italian sky, and he was evidently thinking deeply. Someone asked him what he was thinking. I was wondering, said Caradoc, how these people could envy me my mud cottage and my few fields so far away in our poor, cold northern Britain. The spectators, who had flocked from all parts of Italy to see the famous chief, began to think it was a pity that so brave a man should be put to death. After the triumph, the emperor wished to meet this gallant savage face to face. Caradoc and his wife were brought before Claudius, who, in royal garments of purple and gold, was seated upon an ivory throne. Caradoc looked at the emperor with his calm, brave eyes and did not appear to be in the least dismayed. Claudius said to himself that this British chief was a truly great man. He asked his prisoner what he thought of Rome. I think it is a very great and wonderful city, replied Caradoc. and that its people are a very great people. Do you know what this great people do to those who have been bold enough to resist their will? Asked the emperor. Yes, replied Caradoc simply. I am told that you put their leaders to death when you have captured them, and I wonder that a wise and great people like the Romans should have such a custom. After having defeated a man, what greater glory is to be won by putting him to death? It seems to me that it would be more worthy of the Roman people to spare him in order to show that they are generous as well as brave. Claudius was so pleased with his captive's wise and fearless reply that he had him restored to liberty with his wife and family. The Roman who has told us the story of Caradoc in one of his books does not say whether the brave chief was allowed to return to Britain or whether he had to spend the rest of his life in the land of his conquerors. I hope his captors sent him back to Britain, for I am sure that he loved his native land the best, and that he would have liked to end his days among the brave countrymen who had helped him to withstand the great and powerful nation of Rome. Thanks for watching Elite Stories. If you enjoyed this journey through history, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned. The next part is coming soon.